and the debtor's obligation to feed into the gathering agreement, then the gas doesn't get produced. Because the debtor literally would lose money every time he sold the gas. If it's rejected in that circumstance, and you end up with a stalemate, you force the two parties to either reach an economic agreement or not. That's not really controlled by bankruptcy law, though. And so, is that a good idea, even if that is the right legal answer? What do you think?
I don't know. So, I've always thought about the decisions that's been gone up. And I read your Alta Mesa decision, and I thought, all right, you can't reject covenants right with the land. And then I read Sanchez. And when I read Sanchez, it just proposed right there, I can reject it and then renegotiate. But how do you ever get to a point to avoid the stalemate? Can I ever just say, attack business judgment and be like, listen, you have to use my gathering agreement. It's too expensive to truck or flare. And as a result, here's my price. If you don't do my price, good luck.
Yeah, what's the difference between that and having it rejected? I mean, you're telling me that the stalemate could maybe exist a different way, but debtor's not going to produce if it doesn't get renegotiated, right?
Right.
What's the gatherer going to do if the debtor isn't producing?
It's going to find a new, well, the debtor has to gather, and he has to use this toll road. So he has no...
I don't think the debtor has an obligation to gather. It only has an obligation to deliver to the pipeline what is gathered, right?
Correct.
I mean, I'm sorry, what is produced.
Correct.
Yeah. So the real problem in this is the covenants running with the land. I think the law is developed to the point where those just aren't rejectable by a debtor. It's only the debtor's performance that terminates when the debtor rejects. So the landlord's or the gatherer's rights remain in place. And I actually think that my Alta Mesa decision and my Sanchez decision are different. And Sanchez just shows that the law developed after Alta Mesa, I think. You disagree with that? Go ahead. Get to attack.
When we were arguing Hilltop, we were the gatherer. And we literally looked to the two cases that really did support us. Badlands, which basically said, hey, I have a covenant running with the land, you can't reject that, sorry. I also looked to Alta Mesa, same thing. It's a covenant running with the land, you can't reject that. And those were the two cases we had to stand on. Ultimately, through the development, we had some intermediate. We had Sanchez that basically said, all right, it's a covenant running with the land, great. You can reject it, not the covenant, but you can reject the economic performance terms on it. So the minimum commitment volumes, the fees, and all those other economical terms can be rejected. So at this point, we're now at that stalemate situation.
Correct.
Where either you negotiate or you have a gathering system that's not being used.
Yeah, I just think that's where we are. Yeah.
I respectfully, as somebody who cares a lot about this issue, I still think that even if we're in this stalemate, the gatherer ultimately has the upper hand for a couple of different reasons. And one thing, when we were looking on the other side of the Sanchez decision of what to do on behalf of the gatherer, you also have the overlay of what tariffs are on file with the Railroad Commission. And oftentimes, and this is a practice point when you represent gatherers, is you want to make sure that the rates that are set forth in your tariffs are consistent with your commercial agreements. Because when you're in a situation where you represent a gatherer and the commercial terms of your agreement may be rejected, but you also have a debtor that's only going to get paid, or the producer's only going to get paid if they continue to move your hydrocarbons, odds are they're not going to shut in, and they're not going to be able to shut in before the next time or the beginning of the month when the revenue cycle kicks over. And so when you're in this weird stalemate position, ultimately as the gatherer, make sure that you're looking to see what additional support you have for your existing rates are, because if that's the case, then you're dealing with a producer that's moving gas on standby rates,
Right.
and then you have to rely on the railroad commission and the tariffs that are on file there.
Well, but if you think about the running with the land part isn't the main pipeline. The running with the land part are the collateral lines that are running onto that particular field. And if that particular field isn't producing, how is the gatherer surviving with its unused pipes and seals and valves and all that stuff if there isn't any gas running through it?
If it's one of the ancillary lines, I guess that's one thing. But if you're talking about a debtor's gathering system, that it's their core gathering system, and the rates in the underlying agreement may be out of market, that may be true. But if the debtor isn't going to be able to generate revenue at all, then I think that you're still in a position of the gatherer holds the upper hand by virtue of the provision that it negotiated in its gathering agreement to begin with, which is a real property interest.
In your example, did you ultimately negotiate down in terms of your commitment fees?
No.
Okay, well, typically we did, so. We were in the stalemate situation of, do we want a counterparty? Do we want to make some money? The answer was yes. So,
I mean, both parties do better if the gas is produced and gathered. But the gas will not be produced and gathered if it has a negative cash flow impact on the producer of the gas. And that's what the stalemate is about. The gatherer has the pipelines running there, and if they're empty, the gathering system, not the transportation, not the ultimate transportation system. You may have other customers for the ultimate transportation system. But if the ultimate transportation system is priced at a market price, where in fact it is getting gas put in, then that's not where the problem is. The problem is on the collateral gathering lines. I think you probably do, it may be people have upper hands in this stalemate, and that will vary from case to case, of course. But everybody is better off. You got a question right over here.
Can you guys also expand on when you said takedown fees?
I didn't hear you.
Can you guys expand on when you said takedown fees? I got lost there.
So you had minimum commitment volumes, and you had like 15 cents per 1,000 cubic of gas. Ultimately, when the negotiations were happened, it was uneconomical at the start. Ultimately, prices went down, at least for the benefit of the debtor, who was the E&P company, not the gatherer.
Judge, in one of your opinions, you referenced or alluded to the doctrine of changed circumstances, which obviously would be in a sales situation, not an assumption situation. But I was wondering if you've seen that develop more, or in this case law, or how that might be used to break the stalemate.
I'm sorry, I just didn't, can you repeat
The doctrine of changed circumstances for avoiding by under state law a burdensome covenant.
I guess I'm not following your question. If you're asking when the original documents were done, could they have been done to take into account the changing circumstances? Sure. But
I think under Texas law, if you have an easement or a covenant running with the land and the circumstances surrounding the property have changed significantly enough, you can go into court and have a covenant stripped. But it's a judicial process, it's a litigation. So in theory, that could be used under 363.
I'm unfamiliar with that, but it would seem unlikely to me, and I may be wrong about this likelihood, that the change in circumstances is oil and gas prices fell. You're not going to get anything changed. If the change in circumstances is that the gathering pipeline can't operate at all because there's been a change in federal law so that the gatherer can't gather, that may be a different story. But in the bankruptcy case, what we're typically dealing with is a substantial change in oil and gas prices, not anticipated at the time the contract was signed, that has made the contract uneconomic. And that's why it's being rejected. But I'm actually just not familiar with the other case law that you're talking about. Maybe.
Is there anybody else that wants to get in this debate? It makes it a lot more interesting when we get questions out there from the crowd. Anybody else want to weigh in? Going once, going twice. Sean, judges, any other parting words on this part of the presentation?
I'm okay.
All right. Because you're the judge, I'm gonna hand it back to you.
All right, because I'm old. So we're going to talk now about alternative energy sources and what is going on with them at the current time, and especially what's happening with all the changes in potential tax law, tariffs, things of that nature. So take it away.
Great, thanks, Judge. As I said, I'm not a bankruptcy practitioner. I'm a UT law grad, probably poor for not having taken Professor Westbrook's class during my time there. But I have labored for 30 years or so in the vineyards of legislative and regulatory policy, and for about the last 15 in the electric power sector. Texas representing primarily renewable energy, IPPs, and more recently battery energy storage companies. So I think what I'd like to start with today is just level set a little bit. How many of you saw headlines like these and thought, this is a space maybe I should be watching? Anybody? Yeah, see some nods around the room, see some hands in back. Okay, great. How many of you have actually represented a party in a bankruptcy proceeding related to renewable energy? Any takers in the room? Okay, we've got one down here. All right, great, good. All right, super interesting. So there's definitely some headwinds in this space, and if you lines, you might think pretty dire times ahead. And I won't deny the headwinds, but I want to tell you that there's a more nuanced story to be understood here. 2025 has been, in many ways, the perfect storm. You had a number of things come together. You had higher financing costs than we had seen in recent years. You also, and I'll talk in more detail about each of these, are seeing tightened availability for tax credits at the federal level that were important to tax equity swaps and other financing mechanisms for these projects. That challenges project timelines because of some of the timing associated with that and the economics of some projects as well. At the same time, you saw companies, developers really being whipsawed by tariff and trade policy. So that's on top of what happened in the Reconciliation Act at the beginning of the middle of summer. And finally, due to changes in administration policy, you're seeing a lot of administrative and regulatory uncertainty surrounding these projects that's further heightening project risk and making financing more challenging. There are risk premiums associated with that that are also bearing this situation. So everybody, I think, is aware of and followed perhaps H.R. 1, which was passed during the summer, sometimes known as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the Reconciliation Act, and there are a number of things in there that are really important, particularly for all segments of renewable energy, and I'll talk about a little bit of that here. One is, it just tightened the availability of these credits. Some of them were aggressively tightened, like really, particularly with respect to residential clean energy installations. You saw those being really zeroed out almost immediately as of September of this year. You saw a lot of spending actually leading up to that as people tried to take advantage of the last availability of those credits. Same thing with EV credits. You saw a big bolus sort of moving through the system there. Clean energy manufacturing saw it's sort of a mixed story there. Wind components in particular have a 27 phase out. Some of the other clean energy manufacturing has a later phase out, but it also has been impacted by the revocation by the administration of a number of grant programs that were funding advanced clean energy manufacturing. You've seen the retraction of those grants out there. When we talk about utility scale development, Texas is now the leader in the country in installed capacity in wind, utility scale solar, and utility scale battery energy storage systems, all of those. In a state traditionally known and still known for oil and gas development. And a lot of my clients in those sectors actually are powering a lot of the development of the Permian Basin. They're powering the electrification of industrial facilities on the Gulf Coast. But we really saw some aggressive moves there. The short story is wind and solar credits are eliminated as of the end of 27. There are safe harbors that you can secure that will extend the availability of those credits for 4 years, provided that a couple of different things happen. This is where some of the uncertainty enters into the picture. Commencement of construction rules. Used to be if you had spent 5% of the capital required, that was a safe harbor for your project. The Treasury issued some guidance, some regulations that restricted that and really required physical work on the site. It can also be investments in manufacturing of equipment that is not otherwise held in stock. They can qualify you for commencement construction. There's some continuity requirements there as well.
So Shannon,
Yes, sir.
just everything you're talking about is expecting a failure in the short term, after the short term. In the short term, there may be some tax credits to carry you through. In the short term, you may get your manufacturing subsidized.
Right.
In the long term, maybe we re-adopt tax credits, but maybe we don't. So how do you save a business that is manufacturing wind turbines?
Yep.
Now, why will anybody put money into that business if it's dependent upon the whim of the government from year to year?
It's a great question, and I think the answer to that is that the aggressive retraction of the credits obviously really whips off some businesses. That said, the economics of clean energy at this point are so significantly advanced that I think, and I'll talk about here in a bit what some of the numbers look like there, that I think you're going to continue to see forward progress, particularly as you look at demand growth in this country. Even if you don't follow these issues and you open the paper, you're seeing a lot of the headlines about AI. Texas is at the epicenter of data centers. Northern Virginia really was kind of the hot spot for a long time and still is one, but Texas is really the epicenter of that. And the reasons for that are not only a regulatory environment that is favorable, but because we have abundant, low-cost energy. That's the driver. And I think, the manufacturing, I think part of, and I'll get to this next point, I'm glad you asked the question, Judge. The other shoe that we're waiting to see drop is there are some prohibited foreign entity restrictions in HR 1. I won't go deeply into the details, but essentially what it is foreign, primarily Chinese-owned, also some very significant restrictions both on contracting and material sourcing. Like even a licensing agreement can get you caught up in the PFE restrictions. And there will be material assistance ratios that will start to kick in. But the reason that it's the shoe that has yet to come is that the Treasury has not yet issued these regulations. There was a very aggressive timeline. Thank you, Sean. There was a very aggressive timeline for those regulations, and they have not issued them. And they're introducing some additional uncertainty in the system, Judge. Okay, I'm going to just touch on this briefly because I've already mentioned it, but really tariffs are additionally contributing to cost and supply uncertainty here. We had double tariffs on aluminum and steel, obviously key components for a lot of the equipment that's being used here. There's additionally a Section 232 investigation that's been opened with respect to wind that could further increase tariffs there. On solar, the Chinese lead the world, not surprisingly, in the manufacturing of solar components. What you've seen is really aggressive action. It's not limited to this administration, by the way, on anti-dumping and countervailing duties cases there on Chinese manufacturers, but additionally on solar cells and modules being produced in Southeast Asian countries. It further is really creating a lot of uncertainty and price increases in the supply chain there. It's reshaping cell and module sourcing. Finally, battery energy storage. Really reshaping supply chains here. Batteries actually fared okay under the Reconciliation Act because their credits are extended all the way to 2033 and then phased down after that, but they are subject to these foreign entity restrictions. And interestingly though, and goes back a little bit to your question, Judge, about advanced energy manufacturing, it's a mixed bag there. If your business was dependent on a large DOE grant or something like that to get across, you have problems, but these foreign entity restrictions could have some benefits. There are some domestic solar manufacturers who actually are quite bullish on the market because of what they're seeing in demand. I just had a client the other day ink a 5 gigawatt agreement for sodium ion batteries being produced here in the United States. So it's a mixed bag there for clean energy manufacturing.
So why, but if the alternative energy is dependent on tax credits, if prices are gonna go up for the supply chain
Yep.
because of tariffs,
Yep.
then how will these things remain competitive with just plain old oil and gas?
Well, clearly that's the play that's being made, right? The reality is that even without the tax credits, wind, solar, battery, certainly wind and solar, and largely battery energy storage are very cost competitive. They're cheaper than a gas plant. The differences between the two are very capital intensive up front. That's why the financing costs matter. A 2% difference in financing can mean a 15 to 20% difference in levelized cost of energy over time. So that's really important. But I think there is a narrative out there of dependence on these credits. While certainly they were beneficial from a financing standpoint because they are so capital intensive up front, these tax equity deals were providing a revenue stream that was very important. But I don't think that's the end of the story, and demand will end up being part of it. I've talked about the grant cancellations. There's one other thing I want to talk about that's a headwind, and then I'm going to get to the other side of the story, and that is administrative reviews. There's a lot of concern out there that administrative reviews that are required for projects will be paused, slowed, reach adverse determinations that possibly would not have been adverse determinations in the past. And we're seeing that in reviews by the Fish and Wildlife Service on bald and golden eagle protection. FAA determinations are required on tall structures like wind turbines, so no hazard determinations there, and also just things like Section 404 reviews for wetlands and things like that for solar projects. So those are all out there. This is sort of goes to some of your question here, Judge, like what's the reaction been? What's actually happening in the market out there? And I think what you're seeing is that first half of 2025, really strong numbers. Things were pretty white hot, but everybody knew that something was looming over the hill. After the passage of HR 1, very pessimistic outlook on the market, and I think you can see in the second half of 25, it started to rebound. That said, let's acknowledge that you're building less renewable energy. It makes sense. You take away an incentive, you're going to see less of it than you did before. But I think there's a little bit of recovery in what the forecasts look like there. This is the flip side, certainly with respect to utility scale. If you're here in Texas, if you look at this map, we are at the epicenter of the data center boom. And the things that matter to data center development, we have over 200 gigawatts of data centers alone in our queue. Not all of those will be built, but even if we grow from an 85 gigawatt peaking system to say 120 gigawatt system, that's a massive amount of growth. And the reasons that they are coming here are speed to interconnection. You can interconnect faster. We're struggling with some of these large loads now, but you can interconnect faster here in Texas than you can almost anywhere in the country. And abundant, low-cost, affordable power. Why are renewables playing that? And the answer is speed to power. You can deploy renewables and battery energy storage projects somewhere in the range of 18 months, 36 months at the outside. It takes much longer to build a thermal unit. And there are significant supply chain constraints. If you read the Wall Street Journal, you see GE, Vernova, Siemens, some of the other big turbine manufacturers saying that if you placed they're spoken for through 2028. GE has said all of our turbines are bought up through 2028. And if you put in a reservation payment today, you would likely not see your turbine until 2029, 2030, 2031. So there's a real backlog there. You're actually seeing these data centers resort to like small reciprocating engines, say Caterpillar and others manufacture. So the demand is driving continued investment in Texas. If you look at the interconnection queue in Texas, 79% of that queue, 160 of solar, 192 of battery energy storage. You know, that's almost 200 gigawatts right there. So demand might save the day. Here are the things I want you to take away from this conversation. I know I probably went a little bit in the weeds there for some folks' taste on that, but I wanted you to have a flavor for what we're talking about here. The market impacts very much differ by segment. I think we really drove that home. You have seen some filings. You know, earlier in the year, you saw Sunnova, which was a Houston-based, a large residential clean energy installer, file for bankruptcy. They had some other issues besides these, but they acknowledged in their declarations that a lot of this uncertainty certainly contributed to some of the challenges that they were encountering. You saw a big residential solar financing company, Mosaic, file earlier, Powin, which is a battery systems integrator. The most recent shoe to drop was the filing by Pinegate Renewables earlier this month. That was a significant clean energy developer with big backers. I mean, Brookfield, Carlyle, like major backing. They filed for Chapter 11 on November 6th. You are seeing some increase in project cancellations. In ERCOT, just to put it in perspective, 16 gigawatts of projects canceled in Q2 of 2025. That's a 44% increase in cancellations. And what's happening there is because of the tightened availability of the credits, developers are going through and they are triaging their development pipelines to focus their capital on those projects that they think they can achieve within the safe harbor.
One question, time for one question.
Yeah, let's do it.
Anybody? All right, thank you.
Thanks, Judge.
Thanks again to our great panel here. Right now, we're going to take a 10-minute break.